Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Matt Terrill, who is the former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio. He is now the Managing Partner of Firehouse Strategies. He joins us from Washington. Matt, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us. I mean, a lot of pomp and ceremony, I think it's fair to say, last night with the various events at the White House. Probably you could say that it matched the same pomp and ceremony that Crown Prince Mohammed Salman gave to President Trump during his visit to Saudi Arabia back in May. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Absolutely, no question about it. The red carpet was rolled out for President Trump when he was overseas doing his visit, and certainly the red carpet was rolled out yesterday during that visit as well by the prince. And look, you know, this just shows the growing partnership, the great partnership that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. And I think what you saw wasn't just policymakers or politicians a part of this, but key members of the business community. You saw celebrities, Tiger Woods, for example, at the dinner last night. So this just shows the partnership that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it just wasn't about the dinner last night. It's also about deal making here. Certainly deals are being made, whether it's on AI and technology or the sale of F-35 fighter jets. That certainly are all things that were important, certainly to Saudi Arabia, I think, and also certain things, of course, being tackled here that are important in the United States as well.
I'm going to ask you a bit more about that dinner last night and who was there, if we have time, a bit later in the interview. But I really want to pick up on a couple of those points you just made there about the AI agreements, the F-35s. I mean, these are pieces of military hardware and tech that the United States doesn't just sell to anyone, does it?
They don't. In fact, there are countries who have wanted this hardware. The UAE, for example, I believe has wanted this hardware. You know, look, Israel has this hardware, and obviously that's a dynamic here. But I think what it shows is that President Trump, the United States, has great trust in Saudi Arabia, great respect for Saudi Arabia. And, you know, this is just building on that partnership. You know, I don't believe this sale would take place unless there's that trust with Saudi Arabia that the United States now has and has had for a number of years, of course. So, look, this is obviously valuable sale to Saudi Arabia, but it's also a commitment by the United States when it comes to defense purposes. You also saw President Trump talk about, you know, the importance of having kind of this NATO-like relationship, if you will, with Saudi Arabia. So, look, this is something that was important, I think, to Saudi Arabia for quite some time. Now this sale is going to take place of these F-35s. It's obviously a big deal. It's kind of the crown jewel, if you will, fighter jet that's out there. Many countries want it. Indeed.
Then, of course, there was the promise that Saudi Arabia is going to invest as much as $1 trillion in the United States. That's up sharply on a previous pledge of 600 billion US dollars. Do you think the fact that it went from 600 billion to $1 trillion took a lot of people by surprise there?
Yeah, look, with President Trump, often you see these numbers go up when he's negotiating with countries and with companies. But look, I think it's just showing that this is a serious next step, if you will, that both Saudi Arabia and the United States wants to take. You know, I think Saudi Arabia recognizes that, you know, they've been seeing President Trump talk about that golden era or that golden age, if you will, that President Trump wants to lead the United States towards. But Saudi Arabia wants to lead towards their own golden age. And the best way for them to do that is to continue to have a greater partnership between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And part of that is investment. And so I think, you know, this investment is going to be good for Saudi Arabia, but it's also a good investment for the United States. You're going to see this investment trickle into the U.S. economy. In fact, you saw just yesterday someone in the Oval Office who was talking about how this would impact states like South Carolina, you know, through job growth, you know, for example. So, look, this is a real deal for the citizens of the U.S. You know, right now, obviously, affordability, the U.S. economy is top of mind among the American people. And when President Trump is working to tackle those issues, such as affordability, I think part of that isn't just talking about domestic things that he's doing here in the United States, but also these kind of key commitments, such as from Saudi Arabia. Getting this investment into the U.S. economy is obviously vital and something I think will help bolster the U.S. economy in the years to come here.
I mean, clearly, President Trump, who's nearly 80, has a very good rapport with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who is half President Trump's age. He's just turned 40. President Trump called him, quote, a very good friend of mine, and said he'd done incredible things. I wanted to ask you, Matt, how important you think that rapport between those two men is and has been in helping us get to the point that we're now talking about trillion-dollar deals.
Yeah, I think it's vital. Look, when you look at deals, whether it's in the private sector or a leader making deals with countries, it comes down to having good relationships. Being able to negotiate, cut deals, you got to have a good relationship and the ability to have trust. And I think these two leaders have that in one another. But also, I think it's important to note that it's not just on these deals, but go back and take a look, for example, when the U.S. was involved with the war with Iran, between Israel and Iran. You saw Saudi Arabia really step up there, during that bombing, if you will, that campaign by the U.S. You saw Saudi Arabia step up to the plate and really help and support the U.S. during that campaign. I think that just goes to show they are a true ally. They've become I think, greater ally for the U.S. And I think that's something President Trump has worked on over a series of years. It hasn't just been his second term here that this is all, sort of kind of happened in terms of this relationship. You got to go back and take a look at his first term when he was doing this, not just with Saudi Arabia, but other leaders, if you will, in the Middle East. Obviously, the Abraham Accords were a big, big win for President Trump and his administration, and I think for the world, frankly, in his first term. We'll see what happens next with Saudi Arabia with respect to the Abraham Accords. But I think this was really a very effective trip here that we saw here to Washington, and really something that I think goes to show that there's just greater abilities here for both of these nations to enter that next golden age that I think both these leaders want both their countries to enter into.
Yeah, so something we're hearing from you, and we've heard from other guests as well, this sense that security ties between Saudi Arabia and the United States are stronger than ever. Economic and business ties are stronger than ever. And that's probably why some 400 CEOs from Saudi and US companies have gathered for this US-Saudi investment forum. What's your understanding of what that forum's all about, Matt?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of investment taking place here, and that's going to be huge for the private sector, right? I mean, you take a look at some of the key investments being made. It's not just with defense and aircraft and military hardware, but we've talked about, the fact that this AI investment, so I think you're going to see, for example, just here in the United States, many of the leaders of the big tech companies here in the United States really working hand in hand with Saudi Arabia leadership. So look, part of this is just, these are business deals and these are investments that are going to be integrated through private sector companies here in the US. And so look, this is not just about, defense. It's not just about the Abraham Accords. This isn't just about, trying to, drive peace in the Middle East, which I think Saudi Arabia will be critical towards. This is also about, private sector deals being made here. They're going to have a huge impact, I think, not just on Saudi Arabia, but also on, frankly, the United States. I go back to, job growth, job creation is vital right now here in the U.S. You're seeing Americans really talk about affordability, job creation, these kind of investments you have from countries, whether it was the trade deal with Japan that President Trump made, or this deal that's being made with Saudi Arabia, building on that $600 billion investment to get to $1 trillion, that's greater investment into the private sector, into the United States. And so these CEOs are going to want to be at the table to help drive that investment, to help utilize that investment as they're making key opportunities here in the U.S. as well. You talk about onshoring of jobs. It's not the public sector that does that. It's the private sector. That's why you need these CEOs at the table here to help drive this.
Right, and I said I would ask you, if we had time, and we apparently do, to ask you a little bit about the dinner last night, because as you said, Cristiano Ronaldo, the football player who plays for the Saudi club Al Nassr, was amongst the guests there. You mentioned Tiger Woods. Elon Musk was there too. And I'm just wondering whether the fact that Elon Musk was there means that perhaps bridges have been mended, have they, between Elon Musk and President Trump?
I think so. Look, I think they're both individuals who are our leaders at the end of the day. And look, you saw that not just last night with Elon Musk being there. He was, Elon Musk was at the Charlie Kirk Memorial service just a few weeks ago and had a moment with President Trump there as well. So look, I think that relationship, I think has been repaired. I mean, look, is it going to be, candidly, is it probably going to be the same of what it was? Probably not, right? I think President Trump is somebody who certainly forgives but doesn't forget. And obviously there was some turbulence there in that relationship. At the end of the day, Elon Musk is an incredible individual in the sense of being an innovator, of being a business leader. Obviously, I think President Trump really appreciated what Elon Musk did through the Doge campaign, if you will, and the work that Elon Musk has done in that effort. So, look, I think both these men respect each other. And really, at the end of the day, President Trump is surrounding himself with people that he respects, trusts, and knows. And I think he has that in Elon Musk. And obviously, there were other people, to your point, there last night as well. You're seeing many business titans, CEOs, celebrities, people like Tiger Woods, as I mentioned, there as well. So, really, this was almost like a state dinner, right? I mean, it technically wasn't, but it had the effect of it and had the feel of it. That just goes to show, again, the respect, the trust that President Trump has in Saudi Arabia, and the appreciation I think he has for this great partnership that they're only going to build on. I think, frankly, it's going to be exciting to see what happens next here.
Yeah, indeed. And President Trump did say that his son, Barron, is a big fan of Cristiano Ronaldo. Not something I knew. But just going back to the matter in hand, just to wrap up this conversation, Matt, I mean, we're talking here about a pretty much century-old bond between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And as you've been saying, the red carpet has been very much rolled out for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, all the trappings of a state visit. What would be your greatest takeaways from this visit so far? And then as an extension of that question, what's been the photo moment, would you say, of this trip?
Well, I think the photo moment was when they were standing outside the White House yesterday, and you had those F-35s fly over. And it's not uncommon for President Trump to do a flyover when you have world leaders visiting the White House. But I think it was showing, to the world, frankly, what the possibilities are if you partner with the United States, if you build greater friendship with the United States. And I think you're seeing that on full display here. And I think the bigger takeaways, though, out of this are going to be what happens next, right? Talk is talk, but action really matters. But I think what you're seeing is this action is already underway. And I think really it's just not going to be on the investments that we're talking about, but certainly what happens next with the Abraham Accords. I actually think that Saudi Arabia over the next year will join the Abraham Accords. I believe that's going to take place. I think you will see that happen. Obviously, they talked about some of the dynamics that Saudi Arabia wants to see take shape in order to do that. But I am confident that they will join the Abraham Accords. So it's one of the big things to watch. That is, frankly, one of President Trump's legacy projects, if you will. And frankly, the bigger elements at play here are the Middle East itself. President Trump, has been working to end wars. One of those, of course, was this horrific war in the Middle East that has now come to an end. But what are the next steps on ensuring sustained peace in the Middle East, sustained momentum to ensuring that new wars don't break out? And I think it's just this new opportunity in the Middle East. But I think what President Trump recognizes is that he can't be the only leader to try and bring greater peace to the Middle East. He's got to have great partnerships there in the region to do that. And I believe that he believes that Saudi Arabia can be that great leader to help spread that peace and economic opportunity through the Middle East, which really could be that next golden age that I think we all around the world want to see happen, and not just in terms of peace, but an economic opportunity for those who really need it the most right now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. A pleasure talking to you. Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio, Managing Partner of Firehouse Strategies. Thank you for your time.